What do you call a capital that ruled longer than Rome, survived more sieges than Jerusalem, and outlasted every other city in European history? Constantinople. For 11 centuries, it stood as the wealthiest, most fortified, and most culturally sophisticated city in Christendom. Then in 1453, after 53 days of bombardment, it became something else entirely. The Ottoman conquest didn't end this city's story. It transformed it into Istanbul, capital of an Islamic empire that would dominate 3 continents. This is the tale of how one city died and was reborn without ever ceasing to exist. A 1600-year journey from Constantine's Christian vision to the modern metropolis straddling Europe and Asia. In 657 before the Common Era, Greek colonists from the city-state of Megara stood at the edge of a narrow waterway that would change the course of world history. Led by a commander named Byzas, these seafaring traders gazed across the churning waters of the Bosphorus Strait, barely half a mile wide at its narrowest point, where the dark waters of the Black Sea funneled toward the Mediterranean. Here, at this strategic choke point between 2 continents, they founded a settlement that would bear their leader's name, Byzantium. What possessed these Greeks to establish their colony at this precise location? The answer lay in geography itself. The Bosphorus represented one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the ancient world, a natural gateway controlling all maritime traffic between the resource-rich lands bordering the Black Sea and the bustling trade networks of the Mediterranean. Any merchant vessel carrying grain from the fertile plains of what is now Ukraine, timber from Anatolia, or precious metals from the Caucasus had no choice but to navigate this narrow passage. Control the Bosphorus, and you controlled one of antiquity's most lucrative trade routes. But the strait's importance extended far beyond commerce. The Bosphorus, along with its southern cousin the Dardanelles, formed the only water connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. This made the strait a geographic fulcrum, a hinge upon which the fate of empires would turn. The city of Byzantium commanded not just a waterway but a boundary between worlds. On the western shore lay Europe. On the eastern shore, Asia began. Few locations on Earth could claim such a position, sitting astride 2 continents while controlling the passage between 2 seas. The Greek colonists built their settlement on a triangular promontory jutting into the strait, protected by water on 2 sides and steep hills on the third. Natural harbors provided shelter for ships. The surrounding lands offered fresh water and fertile soil. Fish teemed in the waters, particularly the prized tuna that migrated through the strait each season. For centuries, Byzantium prospered as a Greek trading post, growing wealthy on customs duties and trade, yet remaining relatively modest in size and ambition. Then came Rome. In the 1st century before the Common Era, as the Roman Republic expanded eastward, Byzantium found itself absorbed into Rome's growing empire. Under Roman rule, the city's strategic importance only grew. Roman engineers improved its harbors and fortifications. Roman merchants expanded its trading networks. Yet, Byzantium remained merely one prosperous city among hundreds in the vast Roman world. No one in those early Roman centuries could have imagined that this ancient Greek colony would one day become the capital of empires, the jewel of Christendom, and the most contested city on earth. But the seeds of that transformation were already planted in its geography, waiting for the right moment in history to bloom. In the year 324 of the Common Era, Emperor Constantine stood victorious over his rival Licinius, finally becoming sole ruler of the vast Roman Empire. But Constantine faced a problem that had plagued Rome for decades. The old capital on the Tiber River no longer sat at the empire's center of gravity. The real threats and opportunities lay eastward along the Danube frontier and the Persian border. Rome itself had become a relic, crowded with pagan temples and an aristocracy resistant to change. Constantine needed a fresh start, a new capital that would embody his vision of a Christian Roman Empire. Why did Constantine choose the ancient trading post of Byzantium for this grand purpose? Military strategists had long recognized the site's defensive advantages. The triangular peninsula could be fortified with a single wall across its landward side, while water protected the other approaches. But Constantine saw something more. A city positioned at the crossroads of the empire, equally accessible from the troubled Danube provinces, the wealthy eastern territories, and the breadbasket of Egypt. From Byzantium, an emperor could respond quickly to threats from any direction. On November 11th in 324, Constantine began transforming his vision into stone and marble. The founding ceremony itself revealed the emperor's intentions. Unlike Rome's legendary foundation by Romulus, steeped in pagan mythology, Constantine consecrated his new city as explicitly Christian. Bishops blessed the boundaries as the emperor personally marked out the walls, reportedly walking so far that his courtiers questioned the extent. Constantine's reply became legend. He would continue until he who walks before me tells me to stop, suggesting divine guidance in the city's very dimensions. The construction that followed staggered the imagination. Constantine didn't merely expand the existing town. He created an entirely new city that dwarfed old Byzantium. The new land walls enclosed an area nearly 4 times larger than before. Within these boundaries rose structures designed to rival or surpass Rome's greatest monuments. The Hippodrome, capable of seating 100,000 spectators, became the city's social heart, where chariot races could last from dawn to dusk and emperors appeared before their people in ceremonial splendor. Adjacent to the Hippodrome stretched the Great Palace, a vast complex of audience halls, private apartments, churches, and gardens that would grow with each successive emperor into a labyrinth of power. Unlike the exposed palaces of Rome, Constantinople's imperial residence connected directly to the Hippodrome, allowing emperors to appear in the imperial box without venturing into the streets. This architectural choice would define Byzantine rulership for centuries. Monarchs simultaneously visible yet untouchable, present yet remote. Constantine understood that a capital required more than impressive buildings. It needed history, sanctity, and the accumulated prestige of centuries. So began a systematic transfer of treasures from across the empire. Pagan statues from Athens and Rome lined the new city's forums and public spaces, stripped of their religious context and repurposed as civic decoration. The bronze serpent column from Delphi, commemorating the Greek victory over Persia 900 years earlier, found a new home in Constantinople's Hippodrome. Ancient obelisks from Egypt rose in prominent squares. Most importantly, Constantine gathered Christian relics with the fervor of a man building not just a capital but a holy city. According to tradition, his mother Helena traveled to Jerusalem and returned with fragments of the true cross. Churches rose throughout the city to house these sacred treasures, transforming Constantinople into a pilgrimage destination rivaling Jerusalem itself. The message was unmistakable. This was no longer merely Byzantium, but Nova Roma, the new Rome, capital of a Christian empire. On May 11th in 330, Constantine formally dedicated his creation. the city still bore its founder's name, Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Within those newly built walls, barely 7 years old, gathered a population drawn from across the empire by promises of free grain, tax exemptions, and proximity to imperial power. They could not have known they were witnessing the birth of a civilization that would preserve classical learning through dark ages, withstand sieges by armies, speaking a dozen languages, and endure for 11 centuries after Rome itself had fallen to barbarians. The young emperor Theodosius II inherited a capital that Constantine had built, but left vulnerable. The original walls, constructed hastily in Constantine's time, enclosed vast territories but lacked the sophisticated defensive depth that military science now demanded. By the early 5th century, Constantinople's population had swollen beyond 400,000 souls. The Huns threatened from the north, Persians pressured the eastern frontier, and barbarian tribes carved kingdoms from what had been Roman provinces. The city needed protection worthy of its status as the empire's beating heart. In 413, with Theodosius still a boy of 12, his regent Anthemius initiated the most ambitious fortification project the ancient world had ever seen. The new walls would not simply replace Constantine's barrier. They would create something unprecedented, a triple defensive system that transformed Constantinople into an almost impregnable fortress. The outermost line consisted of a moat 60 feet wide and 22 feet deep. Engineers designed it to be flooded from cisterns during siege, creating a water barrier that siege towers could not cross. Behind the moat rose a low outer wall, the Protikisma, studded with towers every 60 yards. Defenders stationed here could harass attackers while remaining protected by the massive structure looming behind them. The main wall dominated the landscape like a man-made mountain range. Rising 40 feet high and 16 feet thick, this barrier incorporated massive limestone blocks bonded with mortar so resilient it has endured 15 centuries. Every 55 yards, hexagonal and octagonal towers projected outward, rising even higher than the wall itself. These 96 towers created overlapping fields of fire, ensuring no attacker could reach the wall base without exposure to missile fire from multiple angles. Behind this intimidating barrier stood yet another wall, the inner Protikisma, adding a final layer of defense. Any attacker who somehow breached the outer walls would find themselves trapped in a killing ground between barriers, vulnerable from all sides. The total depth of this defensive system exceeded 200 feet. The wall stretched nearly 4 miles from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, protecting Constantinople's landward approaches. Teams of thousands worked for years, quarrying stone from nearby Thrace, engineering drainage systems to prevent erosion, and constructing the infrastructure to support defenders during siege. The project consumed resources that might have funded military campaigns. Yet Theodosius's advisors understood a fundamental truth. Armies could be defeated in the field, but these walls would never surrender. In 447, nature tested the new fortifications with devastating force. A series of earthquakes shattered large sections of the walls, toppling towers and opening gaps that could admit entire armies. Worse timing seemed impossible. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, was advancing toward Constantinople with forces that had already devastated the Balkans. The city appeared defenseless, ripe for conquest. What followed demonstrated Byzantine resilience. Constantine, the city's prefect, mobilized the entire population in a massive reconstruction effort. The circus factions, normally bitter rivals whose chariot racing loyalty sometimes sparked riots, united in common cause. In a mere 60 days, they rebuilt what earthquakes had destroyed, working day and night in shifts. When Attila's scouts approached, they found walls standing even stronger than before, and the Hun leader chose to turn west toward easier prey. The Theodosian walls had passed their first great test. They would stand as Constantinople's shield for more than 1,000 years, turning back siege after siege. Arab armies would break against them like waves on stone. But walls alone could not guarantee survival. The purple boots marked him before the crown ever did. In the imperial court of Constantinople, only those born to reigning emperors could wear the color of Tyrian purple from birth. Justinian wore common leather. Born around 482 in a small Illyrian village, he spoke Latin with a provincial accent that courtiers never let him forget. Yet this peasant's nephew would transform Constantinople into something even Constantine had not imagined, the capital of a restored Roman Empire. His uncle Justin, an illiterate soldier who had risen to become emperor, recognized brilliance when he saw it. He brought young Justinian to Constantinople, educated him in rhetoric and law, and eventually named him co-emperor in 527. When Justin died 4 months later, Justinian inherited an empire diminished but dreaming. Italy belonged to Ostrogothic kings. Vandals ruled North Africa. Spain had fallen to Visigoths. The Mediterranean, once a Roman lake, was carved into barbarian kingdoms. Justinian refused to accept this diminished reality. But before he could reclaim lost territories, he nearly lost everything. January 13th, 532. The hippodrome roared with 80,000 voices as chariot races began. Constantinople's population divided their loyalties between two factions, the Blues and the Greens. These were not mere sports fans but political organizations with private militias. When Justinian ordered the execution of rioters from both factions, something unprecedented occurred. Blues and Greens united against their emperor, transforming sporting rivalry into revolution. "Nika!" they shouted. Victory. The cry that usually celebrated racing triumphs now became a battle cry against Justinian himself. For 5 days, mobs controlled Constantinople's streets. They burned the great Hagia Sophia church that Constantine had built. The Senate House collapsed in flames. Rioters proclaimed a new emperor. Justinian prepared ships for escape, ready to abandon the capital his uncle had entrusted to him. In the palace, as advisors urged flight, Empress Theodora rose. Like Justinian, she had climbed from humble origins, allegedly from the stage where her beauty had captivated the future emperor. Now she spoke words that would echo through history. Purple makes a fine burial shroud. She would rather die an empress than live as an exile. Her courage steadied Justinian's resolve. His general Belisarius led loyal troops into the hippodrome where rebels gathered. The slaughter was absolute. Contemporary sources claimed 30,000 died that day, though the true number remains uncertain. What is certain is that Justinian emerged from the Nika riots with absolute authority, his opposition literally buried in mass graves. From catastrophe came opportunity. The burned Hagia Sophia would be rebuilt as humanity's architectural masterpiece, its dome defying gravity and imagination. But Justinian's ambitions extended beyond stone and mortar. He commissioned legal scholars to compile every Roman law since time immemorial. The result, the Corpus Juris Civilis, condensed 1,000 years of legal tradition into systematic order. This code of Justinian would become the foundation of European legal systems for centuries to come, preserving Roman wisdom even after Rome itself had fallen. Yet laws and buildings, however magnificent, would not restore the empire's glory. For that, Justinian needed military victory. His eyes turned west toward Carthage and Rome itself, toward lands that had once bowed to Caesar's eagles. His general Belisarius, fresh from crushing the Nika riots, prepared for conquest. The Great Reconquest was about to begin. The rubble of the old Hagia Sophia still smoldered when Justinian summoned his architects. 40 days after the Nika riots had reduced Constantine's church to ash and broken stone, the emperor commanded something unprecedented: build a church so magnificent that it would surpass Solomon's temple itself. Two men answered this impossible summons. Anthemius of Tralles was a mathematician and physicist who had written treatises on conic sections and parabolic mirrors. Isidore of Miletus taught geometry and engineering at Constantinople's universities. Neither had built anything remotely approaching what Justinian demanded. They were scholars, theorists, men of numbers and principles. Yet they would create something that defied every architectural convention of their age. The problem was the dome. Justinian wanted a vast central space crowned by a hemisphere that would seem to float above the faithful like heaven itself. But domes required circular bases. Justinian's vision called for a rectangular foundation, a shape that had never successfully supported a major dome. How do you rest a circle upon a square? Anthemius and Isidore's solution was revolutionary. They designed 4 massive piers at the corners, connected by sweeping arches. Between these arches they placed pendentives, curved triangular sections that transformed the square base into a circular crown. No one had attempted this at such scale. The mathematics alone required innovations in geometry that would influence architectural theory for centuries. 10,000 workers labored for 5 years. Stone came from across the empire: green marble from Thessaly, yellow from Syria, purple porphyry from Egypt. 8 columns of green marble were stripped from the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Justinian spared no expense, spending the modern equivalent of billions on materials and labor. The imperial treasury, enriched by Theodora's financial reforms, emptied itself into this sacred project. The dome rose 107 feet in diameter, constructed from special lightweight bricks manufactured on the island of Rhodes. 40 windows pierced its base, creating a ring of light that would make the dome appear weightless, suspended on divine radiance rather than earthly engineering. No building in the ancient world had attempted anything comparable. December 27th, 537. The dedication ceremony rivaled an imperial triumph. Justinian entered through the western portal and walked the length of the nave, his footsteps echoing through space vast enough to swallow cathedrals. 6 acres of gold mosaics glittered on walls and ceiling. Light poured through windows, reflecting off marble columns in rainbow cascades. When Justinian reached the altar, he allegedly spread his arms and proclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." The boast was not entirely empty. Hagia Sophia was the largest enclosed space humanity had ever constructed. Its dome would remain the world's largest for nearly 1,000 years. Byzantine engineers had achieved what Roman architects, for all their concrete innovations, had never managed. A dome that seemed to float without visible support, that transformed structural necessity into spiritual transcendence. Hagia Sophia became the beating heart of Orthodox Christianity. Here emperors were crowned, their heads anointed beneath that impossible dome. Here the liturgy developed its elaborate form, priests moving through incense-clouded spaces, while choirs sang from hidden galleries. The building itself became theology in stone and light. Earth reaching toward heaven, the divine made architectural reality. But Justinian's church was also a statement of imperial power. While his armies reconquered Italy and North Africa, Hagia Sophia announced to the world that Constantinople had become what Rome once was, the center of civilization, the place where human ambition touched the infinite. 20 years after its dedication, earthquake tremors cracked the Eastern Arch. The Great Dome, which had seemed eternal as the heavens it symbolized, collapsed. Isidore's nephew, another architect named Isidore, rebuilt it slightly higher, creating the profile that would define Constantinople's skyline for ages to come. Through all that followed, the church endured. But empires, however magnificent their architecture, however inspired their engineering, remained subject to forces beyond mathematics and stone. The faith that had built Hagia Sophia would face challenges neither Justinian nor his architects could have imagined. The ships arrived in Constantinople's harbors in the spring of 541, carrying grain from Egypt and something invisible, something deadly. Within weeks, people began collapsing in the streets with fever and swollen lymph nodes that turned black as charcoal. The bubonic plague had reached the empire's heart. Procopius, who chronicled Justinian's wars and buildings, now recorded horror. At the plague's peak, 5,000 people died daily in Constantinople. Then 10,000. Bodies piled in the streets because there was no one left to bury them. The city hired men to collect corpses, paying them by the cartload. When graveyards filled, they stuffed bodies into the towers of the CK fortress across the Golden Horn, packing them tight as cargo. The smell of decay drifted across the water, mixing with incense burned in desperate supplication. Justinian himself fell ill. For days, the emperor lay fevered and delirious while courtiers whispered about succession. Who would rule if he died? The empire he had spent 20 years rebuilding teetered on the edge of chaos. Then, inexplicably, Justinian recovered. Most who developed the characteristic buboes did not. The disease seemed to select its victims without pattern or mercy, killing merchant and bishop, slave and senator alike. The plague swept beyond Constantinople, racing along the empire's trade routes. Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage. Every major city watched its population collapse. Rural areas suffered less, but not enough to matter. Historians estimate that 1/4 to 1/2 of the Eastern Mediterranean's population died between 541 and 544. Millions of people simply ceased to exist. The economic impact was catastrophic. Tax revenues plummeted as taxpayers died or fled. The army, already stretched thin across Justinian's reconquered territories, could not maintain recruitment. Who would serve when fields lay fallow and businesses shuttered? The emperor's ambitious building program, which had just completed Hagia Sophia's magnificence, ground to a halt. Worse still, Persia struck. The Sassanid Empire had watched Justinian's western conquests with growing alarm. Now, with Constantinople weakened and depopulated, Persian armies invaded Syria. They captured Antioch, one of Christianity's holiest cities, in 540. The war that followed drained what resources the plague had spared. For decades, Roman and Persian armies clashed across Mesopotamia and the Caucasus. Cities changed hands like gaming pieces. Neither side could achieve decisive victory, yet neither would accept peace. The cost was staggering, not just in gold and soldiers, but in the empire's capacity to respond to other threats. Justinian's reconquests in the West, purchased at such expense, became impossible to maintain. By the time Justinian died in 565, the empire was exhausted. The treasury was empty. The army was diminished. The population had not recovered from the plague's devastation. The dream of restoring Rome's full glory, which had seemed achievable when Hagia Sophia's dome first caught the morning light, now appeared a costly fantasy. Constantinople survived, as it always did. But the city that emerged from plague and war was different. Smaller, poorer, and facing new dangers from directions Justinian had never anticipated. The first Arab fleets appeared off Constantinople's walls in 674, their sails filling the Marmara's horizon like a moving forest. For 4 years, they returned each spring, establishing a base on the peninsula of Cyzicus, launching raids, testing the city's defenses. The Byzantine Empire, still recovering from plague and Persian wars, now faced an enemy animated by religious fervor and military brilliance. Islam had exploded from the Arabian Peninsula with stunning speed. Syria fell. Egypt fell. Persia itself collapsed entirely. The Arabs conquered in decades what Rome had taken centuries to build. Now they wanted the greatest prize. Constantinople, the city that controlled the straits between Europe and Asia, the Christian capital whose capture would open the path to the entire European continent. The Byzantine navy met them with a weapon that would become legendary: Greek fire. Exactly how it was made remains unknown to this day. The formula was a state secret, guarded so carefully that it died with the empire. We know it was a liquid that ignited on contact with water, burning on the sea's surface with flames that could not be extinguished. Ships coated in the stuff became floating infernos, their crews leaping into water that offered no refuge from the fire that followed them down. The Byzantines mounted bronze tubes on their ships' prows, pumping Greek fire through them like liquid death. Arab vessels that came too close erupted in flames that turned night to day. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. How could sailors fight an enemy that commanded fire itself? The Arab chroniclers called it Roman fire and wrote of it with a mixture of awe and terror. By 678, the Arab fleet withdrew. The 4-year siege had failed, costing thousands of ships and men. But the respite proved temporary. In 717, a new Arab army arrived, the largest yet assembled against Constantinople. Contemporary sources claim 200,000 soldiers and nearly 2,000 ships, though such numbers likely grew in the telling. What matters is that everyone who witnessed it agreed This was an overwhelming force that should have been unstoppable. The Arabs established their camp across the straits, settling in for a prolonged siege. Their fleet controlled the waters. Their armies ringed the land walls. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Leo III prepared for what might be the city's final stand. Then winter came, the coldest in decades. Arab soldiers from Syria and Arabia froze in their tents. Supply ships sank in storms. Greek fire continued to destroy any vessel that approached too close. Disease swept through the crowded Arab camps, killing more effectively than Byzantine soldiers ever could. By August 718, after nearly a year of futile siege, the Arabs withdrew again. Of the massive fleet that had arrived, barely a fraction returned home. The Theodosian walls, standing unchanged since the 5th century, had held. The significance of these failures rippled across centuries. Had Constantinople fallen, the Arabs would have controlled both sides of the straits, with nothing between their armies and the fragmented kingdoms of Western Europe. Instead, the Byzantine capital remained a Christian bulwark, absorbing Islamic expansion's full force while Europe slowly rebuilt from Rome's collapse. Constantinople had survived again, its walls and Greek fire preserving not just a city, but an entire civilization's future. Yet the Arab threat would never truly disappear. The victory against the Arabs should have unified Constantinople in triumph. Instead, it sparked one of the most vicious internal conflicts in Byzantine history. Emperor Leo III, convinced that God had punished the empire with military defeats because Christians had fallen into idolatry, turned his attention to the icons that filled every church, monastery, and home across his realm. In 726, Leo ordered the removal of a massive golden icon of Christ that hung above the Chalk Gate, the main entrance to the imperial palace. When workers arrived with ladders, a crowd of women gathered to protect it. Violence erupted. Several women died defending the image. The imperial guard enforced the emperor's will, and the icon came down. This was only the beginning. Leo issued edicts declaring that religious images violated the biblical commandment against graven images. Icons, he argued, reduced Christianity to paganism, encouraging people to worship painted wood rather than God himself. Soldiers marched through Constantinople with orders to destroy or whitewash every religious image they found. The destruction was systematic and thorough. Mosaics that had adorned church walls for centuries disappeared under layers of plain plaster. Painted icons burned in public squares. Illuminated manuscripts had their illustrations scraped away, leaving only text. Sculptural reliefs suffered the chisel. Constantinople's churches, once ablaze with holy images, became stark white spaces decorated only with crosses and geometric patterns. Resistance came swiftest from the monks. Monasteries had preserved icon painting traditions for generations, and monks viewed these images as windows into the divine. They refused to hand over their icons, hiding precious paintings in walls and underground chambers. Some monasteries became fortresses of resistance. The emperor responded with force, closing monasteries, exiling monks, imprisoning those who refused to comply. Common people found themselves caught between imperial law and ancient devotion. For centuries, families had prayed before icons of saints, kissing them, seeking their intercession. Now such acts became illegal. Secret worship continued in private homes, but possession of an icon could mean imprisonment or worse. The controversy split the empire. Western provinces, particularly Greece and Italy, largely rejected iconoclasm. The Pope in Rome condemned it. But Constantinople and the eastern provinces fell under imperial control, where Leo's soldiers enforced the ban with increasing brutality. Theological arguments became political weapons. Those who defended icons faced charges of superstition and idolatry. Iconoclasts accused their opponents of betraying true Christianity. This was not merely an aesthetic debate. Icons represented different understandings of how humans could approach the divine. Could matter itself become holy? Could paint and wood serve as conduits for prayer? Or did such beliefs reduce God to something that could be contained and controlled? The violence would continue for over a century, outlasting Leo and his immediate successors. Churches stood stripped and blank. Artistic traditions vanished. Communities fractured along theological lines. Constantinople, having survived external enemies, now tore itself apart from within over the question of whether religious images honored God or insulted him. The fury of iconoclasm finally exhausted itself, leaving Constantinople stripped of much of its artistic heritage but ready for renewal. In 867, a new dynasty seized the throne that would transform the battered empire into something magnificent once more. The Macedonian dynasty, named for the provincial origins of its founder Basil I, would rule for nearly 2 centuries and restore Constantinople to heights not seen since Justinian's Golden Age. Basil arrived in Constantinople as a peasant from the Macedonian theme, a rough provincial soldier with neither education nor noble blood. Through a combination of cunning, ruthlessness, and genuine military ability, he clawed his way into the imperial household, eventually murdering his patron to claim the throne. Yet this brutal usurper proved to be exactly what the empire needed. He understood warfare, administration, and the importance of cultural prestige. The military revival came first. For generations, Arab raiders had pillaged the empire's eastern provinces with near impunity, while Bulgar armies threatened from the north. Basil and his successors rebuilt the Byzantine military into the most formidable fighting force in the Mediterranean world. Professional soldiers called tagmata formed elite units stationed around Constantinople, while provincial themes provided armies that could respond rapidly to invasion. Under Basil II, who ruled from 976 to 1025, Byzantine armies pushed deep into territories lost centuries earlier. They reconquered Crete from Arab pirates who had used the island as a base for raiding. They seized Cyprus, securing critical sea lanes. In Syria, Byzantine forces captured Antioch, one of Christianity's most ancient cities, restoring it to Christian rule after 3 centuries of Islamic control. The Bulgars, who had threatened Constantinople itself, were crushed so thoroughly that Basil earned the chilling nickname Bulgar Slayer after allegedly blinding 15,000 Bulgar prisoners. Victory brought wealth, and wealth fueled cultural renaissance. Constantinople's population swelled to 500,000 people, making it by far the largest city in Europe. Gold flowed into imperial treasuries from reconquered territories, from taxes on the thriving silk industry, from trade duties as merchants from Kiev to Cairo conducted business in the city's markets. This prosperity funded an explosion of learning and art. The imperial court became a center of classical scholarship, where intellectuals copied ancient Greek texts that would otherwise have been lost forever. Philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and history were studied with renewed vigor. The University of Constantinople trained administrators in rhetoric, law, and philosophy, ensuring the empire's bureaucracy remained the most sophisticated in the Christian world. Church construction resumed on a grand scale, though now decorated with frescoes and mosaics carefully designed to conform with the resolution of the Iconoclasm controversy. Artists developed the distinctive Byzantine style, with its gold backgrounds, formal poses, and spiritual intensity. Illuminated manuscripts emerged from scriptoria with elaborate decorations. Enamel work, ivory carving, and silk weaving reached levels of technical perfection that dazzled foreign visitors. Ambassadors arrived from Kiev, Baghdad, and Venice, seeking treaties and trade agreements. They found a city that seemed touched by divine favor. Constantinople's wealth, its libraries packed with ancient wisdom, its impregnable walls, its churches glowing with gold and candlelight, all proclaimed Byzantine supremacy. Yet this golden age contained the seeds of future crisis. Military success had made the empire powerful but not invincible. And far to the east, a new people were beginning their migration westward, horsemen from the steppes who would eventually challenge everything Constantinople had rebuilt. Every morning, as dawn broke over the Bosporus, Constantinople awakened to a symphony of commerce. Ships from 3 continents crowded the harbors, their sails forming a forest of canvas along the Golden Horn. Venetian galleys unloaded spices from the Indies. Arab doughs brought Persian silks and Egyptian cotton. Viking traders from Rus arrived with furs, amber, and slaves. All came seeking entry to the most lucrative market on earth. At the heart of this commercial empire stood the markets and bazaars that made Constantinople legendary. The greatest was the covered marketplace near the Augustaion, where merchants from every nation conducted business beneath vaulted ceilings. Here, a visitor could purchase Chinese porcelain, African ivory, or gems from Ceylon. The silk merchants occupied entire streets, their shops glittering with fabrics dyed in colors so vibrant they seemed supernatural. Master craftsmen worked gold and silver into jewelry that adorned princes from Ireland to Persia. The air itself seemed perfumed with wealth. Incense from Arabia, rose water from Damascus, the tang of freshly minted coins. The imperial palace complex sprawled across acres, a city within a city housing thousands. Foreign ambassadors summoned for audience underwent ceremonies designed to inspire awe and terror. They walked endless corridors lined with guards in gleaming armor. They passed through chambers hung with silk tapestries depicting Byzantine military victories. Mechanical golden lions roared. Golden birds sang from jeweled trees. The throne itself could be raised hydraulically toward the ceiling while the emperor sat motionless, appearing almost divine in his elevation above mortal men. These theatrical displays served calculated diplomatic purposes. When ambassadors from the German emperor arrived, Byzantine officials made them wait weeks, establishing hierarchy. Russians from Kiev prostrated themselves before treaties written in gold ink. Arab envoys, representing the empire's most formidable rival, received careful respect, but witnessed military parades showcasing Byzantine cavalry and Greek fire, that terrifying incendiary weapon that burned even on water. But Constantinople's greatest treasures were spiritual. The city had become Christianity's holiest site after Jerusalem, housing a collection of relics that pilgrims traveled months to venerate. The Church of the Virgin at Blachernae possessed her sacred robe, which had allegedly saved the city from sieges. Churches throughout Constantinople displayed fragments of the true cross, thorns from Christ's crown, the chains that bound St. Peter, the shroud that wrapped the infant Jesus, a nail from the crucifixion. These relics drew pilgrims who spent fortunes in the city's markets, enriching churches and merchants alike. Daily life in the capital reflected this prosperity. Public baths accommodated thousands. The Hippodrome hosted chariot races that divided the population into passionate factions, the Blues and Greens, whose rivalry occasionally erupted into riots. Aqueducts delivered fresh water from mountains miles away. Underground cisterns stored millions of gallons. Public bakeries ensured bread remained affordable even during famines that ravaged the countryside. The wealthy lived in townhouses decorated with mosaics and marble, attended by slaves from every corner of the known world. They dined on delicacies: roasted peacock, honey-glazed lamb, wine cooled with mountain snow. Scholars debated philosophy in private libraries. Doctors trained in techniques inherited from ancient Greece treated diseases with surprising success. Yet this magnificence existed beside grinding poverty. Beggars crowded church porches. Laborers in the dye work suffered respiratory diseases from toxic fumes. Dock workers broke their backs loading ships that made others wealthy. Most citizens lived in cramped apartments, vulnerable to fires that periodically swept through wooden neighborhoods. Still, they remained proud citizens of the greatest city on earth. Constantinople stood unchallenged, wealthy beyond measure, protected by God and the Virgin. What force could threaten such glory? Who could imagine this eternal city might someday bear another name entirely? The magnificence of Constantinople masked a growing spiritual divide that would reshape Christian civilization. While the city's markets thrived and its churches glittered with gold, tensions with Rome festered over questions that seemed trivial to outsiders but carried profound meaning for believers. Should priests marry? Must bread used in communion contain leaven? Did the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father alone or from both Father and Son? These disputes had roots reaching back centuries. Language itself had become a barrier. In Rome, priests conducted services in Latin, a tongue increasingly foreign to Constantinople's Greek-speaking population. Byzantine theologians crafted subtle philosophical arguments in Greek, which few Western clergy could read. When Roman popes sent letters east, Byzantine scholars often found the Latin crude, the theology simplistic. When Constantinople's patriarchs replied in Greek, Roman recipients struggled to understand the nuances. Political realities deepened the rift. Byzantine emperors, wielding power over both church and state, appointed patriarchs and convened councils. They saw themselves as God's representatives on earth, responsible for both earthly governance and spiritual welfare. Roman popes, by contrast, claimed supreme authority over all Christians, insisting that Peter had founded their church, making them Christ's direct heirs. Neither side could imagine submitting to the other. The breaking point arrived in 1054. Pope Leo IX, determined to assert Roman authority, sent Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople as his representative. Humbert was learned but arrogant, convinced of Latin superiority. Patriarch Michael Cerularius, equally proud, refused to acknowledge Rome's primacy. The two men met like rival monarchs, each expecting the other's deference. Their confrontation escalated rapidly. Humbert demanded that Constantinople accept Roman practices: unleavened bread for communion, the addition of the Filioque clause to the Nicene Creed declaring that the Holy Spirit proceeded from both Father and Son, and crucially, the Pope's absolute authority over all Christians. Cerularius rejected every demand. Byzantine traditions, he insisted, remained closer to apostolic practice. Rome had innovated, Constantinople had preserved. For 3 tense months, negotiations collapsed into accusations. Humbert claimed Byzantine practices were heretical. Cerularius countered that Rome had abandoned true Christianity. Then on July 16, 1054, Humbert did the unthinkable. He strode into Hagia Sophia during afternoon services, marched to the altar where Cerularius stood celebrating liturgy, and slammed down a papal bull excommunicating the patriarch. The document accused Cerularius and his followers of countless errors and heresies. Before shocked witnesses, Humbert shook the dust from his feet and departed, declaring Constantinople damned. 5 days later, Cerularius convened a council. With the emperor's blessing, he issued his own excommunication, condemning Humbert, the Pope, and all who followed Rome. The Great Schism had begun. Christianity split into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic branches, a division that persists today, more than 900 years later. Constantinople emerged from this rupture as Orthodoxy's unquestioned center. Without Rome's competing authority, the Patriarch's power expanded. Byzantine emperors portrayed themselves as protectors of true Christianity against Western innovation. The city's churches became pilgrimage sites for Orthodox believers from Alexandria to Moscow, from Jerusalem to Kiev. Theological schools attracted students from every Orthodox land. Monasteries multiplied on mountains and islands throughout the Byzantine world. The schism also made Constantinople vulnerable in ways few recognized. When Western crusaders would soon march east, claiming to defend Christianity, they would find not brothers in faith, but theological rivals. The split that began with arguments over bread and creeds would eventually facilitate Constantinople's destruction by those who called themselves Christians. The Crusaders who arrived at Constantinople's gates in 1203 did not come as enemies. They came as fellow Christians, soldiers of the cross bound for Egypt to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Yet, within months, these warriors of God would commit one of history's most devastating betrayals, turning their swords against the greatest Christian city on earth. How did this catastrophe unfold? The Fourth Crusade had departed Venice with noble intentions but chronic financial troubles. The Crusaders owed Venice enormous sums for ships and supplies they could not pay. Venetian Doge Enrico Dandolo, ancient and blind but politically shrewd, proposed a solution: help Venice recapture the rebellious city of Zara on the Adriatic coast, and the debt would be forgiven. The Crusaders agreed, though attacking a Christian city already violated their sacred vows. Then came a more tempting offer. Alexios Angelos, a Byzantine prince whose father had been overthrown and blinded, promised the Crusaders vast wealth if they would restore his family to power. He pledged 200,000 silver marks, provisions for the entire army, and 10,000 Byzantine soldiers to join the crusade. It seemed perfect. Restore a rightful emperor, gain resources, then continue to Egypt. The Crusaders sailed for Constantinople. They arrived in June 1203, their fleet filling the Golden Horn with Venetian war galleys. Constantinople's usurper emperor fled at their approach. The Crusaders installed young Alexios as Emperor Alexios IV, expecting their promised reward. But Alexios quickly discovered his treasury was nearly empty. Previous emperors had depleted the reserves. He could not pay what he had promised. As months passed, the Crusaders grew impatient, then angry. Alexios melted down church icons to mint coins, outraging Constantinople's population. Riots erupted. In February 1204, palace conspirators strangled Alexios and proclaimed a new emperor who refused to honor any debts to the Crusaders. The Crusaders, camped outside the walls, now faced a choice: return home impoverished and humiliated, or take by force what had been promised. The decision came easily. They would storm Constantinople, divide its legendary wealth, and establish their own Christian empire in the east. The Venetians, who knew Constantinople's riches intimately from centuries of trade, encouraged this course with particular enthusiasm. The assault began on April 9, 1204. For 3 days, Byzantine defenders threw back every attack. Then Venetian sailors managed to secure bridges from their ships to the walls. Crusaders poured through the breach. The city that had withstood centuries of sieges fell to fellow Christians in hours. What followed was systematic devastation. The Crusaders had promised themselves 3 days of unrestricted plundering, and they took full advantage. They smashed into homes, churches, and monasteries, seizing everything of value. Ancient libraries burned. Priceless manuscripts, preserved for centuries, became ash. Soldiers ripped gold and silver decorations from church altars. They melted down holy vessels for easier transport. In Hagia Sophia, drunken crusaders placed a prostitute on the patriarch's throne and forced her to sing bawdy songs while they looted. The theft of relics particularly horrified Orthodox Christians. Crusaders seized pieces of the true cross, Christ's crown of thorns, the Virgin Mary's robe, and countless bones of saints, shipping these treasures back to churches across Western Europe. Venice received the 4 bronze horses that had adorned Constantinople's hippodrome for 800 years. Today, they stand above St. Mark's Basilica, permanent monuments to this plunder. Chronicler Nicetas Choniates, who witnessed the destruction, wrote that even Muslim conquerors would have shown more mercy. The Crusaders killed indiscriminately, raped women in the streets, and destroyed 1,000 years of accumulated civilization in 72 hours. Estimates suggest they looted wealth worth 7 times the annual revenue of France. From the ruins, the Crusaders established the Latin Empire, crowning Baldwin of Flanders as emperor. But their creation proved hollow. Byzantine nobles fled to establish rival courts in Nicaea and Trebizond, vowing to reclaim their capital. Though Greeks would retake Constantinople in 61 years, the city never recovered its. The Crusaders who now ruled Constantinople proved far less capable than the emperors they had displaced. Baldwin of Flanders and his successors controlled only a fraction of what had been the Byzantine Empire. The Latin Empire's territory extended barely beyond Constantinople itself and a strip of Thracian coast. Meanwhile, Byzantine nobles refused to accept their empire's extinction. 3 separate Byzantine governments formed in exile. At Nicaea, just across the Sea of Marmara, Theodore Lascaris established what would become the most significant of these refugee courts. The Empire of Nicaea preserved Byzantine court ceremony, Orthodox Christianity, and dreams of restoration. Further east, Alexios and David Komnenos founded the Empire of Trebizond along the Black Sea coast, where their descendants would rule until 1461. In northwestern Greece, Michael Komnenos Doukas created the Despotate of Epirus, claiming its own right to the Byzantine throne. These Greek states fought not only Latin crusaders but each other, each ruler convinced he alone could legitimately restore the empire. Yet Nicaea held crucial advantages. Its capital lay close enough to Constantinople to threaten Latin rulers directly. It controlled rich agricultural lands and established diplomatic relations with the rising Seljuk Turks, securing its eastern frontier. Constantinople itself, meanwhile, crumbled. The Latin emperors lacked funds to maintain the city's massive infrastructure. Aqueducts broke down. Public buildings collapsed. The Forum of Constantine, once glittering with marble and bronze, became a quarry where Latin settlers broke up ancient monuments for building materials. Churches stood half empty, their Orthodox priests replaced by Catholic clergy who celebrated Mass in Latin that few understood. The population, which had exceeded 500,000 before 1204, shrank to perhaps 50,000 as Greeks fled to territories controlled by their own rulers. Baldwin II, the last Latin emperor, grew so desperate for money that he pawned the crown of thorns to Venetian merchants and sold lead from palace roofs. When that proved insufficient, he even dismantled buildings to sell their timbers and metal fittings. In Nicaea, Michael Palaiologos emerged as a brilliant general and ruthless politician. After seizing power as co-emperor in 1259, he prepared methodically to reclaim Constantinople. He negotiated alliances with Genoa, Venice's bitter rival, securing their naval support. His armies gradually conquered Latin territories in Thrace, tightening the noose around Constantinople. The opportunity came in July 1261. Michael's general, Alexios Strategopoulos, approached Constantinople with a small force on what should have been a reconnaissance mission. He discovered the Latin garrison had departed to attack a Byzantine island, leaving the city nearly defenseless. Local Greeks opened the gates. Byzantine soldiers entered Constantinople without serious resistance on the 25th of July, 57 years after the catastrophic sack. Michael Palaiologos entered his reclaimed capital on August 15th, walking behind an icon of the Virgin Mary in a solemn procession to Hagia Sophia. There he was crowned emperor, founding the Palaiologos dynasty that would rule until Constantinople's final fall. But the city he inherited bore little resemblance to the magnificent capital his predecessors had lost. Whole neighborhoods lay abandoned, palaces stood as burnt shells, and the treasury remained empty. The Byzantine Empire had returned home, but to a shadow of its former glory. The empire Michael VIII restored in 1261 resembled more a Greek city-state than the Mediterranean superpower of Justinian's era. Byzantine territory had contracted to Constantinople itself, portions of Thrace, scattered islands in the Aegean, and the despotate of the Morea in southern Greece. The empire's population, once numbering in the millions, had dwindled to perhaps 2 million souls. Enemies surrounded this remnant on all sides. To the west, the ambitious Charles of Anjou schemed to recapture Constantinople for Latin Christendom, assembling invasion fleets in Italian ports. Serbian kingdoms expanded southward into former Byzantine Macedonia. Bulgarian Tsars raided Thracian farmlands with impunity. But the gravest threat emerged in Anatolia, where Turkish beyliks, small independent principalities, carved up what remained of Byzantine Asia Minor. By 1300, the empire controlled virtually no territory in Anatolia, the ancient heartland that had provided soldiers and grain for 1,000 years. The Palaiologos dynasty faced perpetual financial crisis. Imperial revenues, which had reached 4 million gold pieces annually before the Fourth Crusade, totaled barely 300,000 by 1320. The treasury could not maintain a proper army or navy. Genoese merchants controlled Constantinople's trade, their fortified quarter of Galata across the Golden Horn generating more customs revenue than Byzantine ports. The empire survived only through cunning diplomacy, playing enemies against each other, and desperate appeals to anyone who might help. These appeals created devastating rifts among Byzantines themselves. Michael VIII sought military aid from Rome by agreeing to unite the Orthodox and Catholic churches under papal authority. At the Council of Lyons in 1274, Byzantine delegates accepted Catholic doctrine. The arrangement saved Constantinople from Charles of Anjou's invasion, but Orthodox believers considered it a betrayal worse than Turkish conquest. Priests refused to commemorate the emperor's name in liturgy. Common people rioted. When Michael died in 1282, the Orthodox Church denied him Christian burial. Civil wars repeatedly devastated the empire's remaining territories. Andronikos II fought his grandson Andronikos III for nearly 7 years, with armies ravaging Thracian countryside. The grandson's death in 1341 immediately sparked another conflict between John V and John VI that lasted 8 years. These weren't disputes over policy. They were survival struggles in which candidates for the throne allied with Serbs, Turks, and Genoese, inviting foreign armies onto Byzantine soil to win crowns controlling almost nothing. Yet amid this political and economic collapse, Constantinople experienced an astonishing cultural renaissance. The Palaiologan period produced the finest Byzantine art since the 6th century. At the Chora Church, artists created luminous mosaics depicting Christ's life with emotional depth and naturalistic detail unknown in earlier Byzantine work. Painters developed new techniques for frescoes, using subtle gradations of color to create sculptural effects. Scholars revived classical Greek learning, copying ancient manuscripts and writing commentaries on Plato and Aristotle. Theodore Metochites' grand logothete under Andronikos II patronized philosophers and historians while composing encyclopedic works himself. These Byzantine humanists would profoundly influence the Italian Renaissance when Greek scholars fled westward carrying precious manuscripts. Constantinople's final emperors understood their position. They dispatched increasingly urgent embassies to Western Europe, offering church union, commercial privileges, anything for military assistance against the Ottoman Turks, who by 1400 had reduced the Byzantine Empire to Constantinople itself and a few coastal towns. The city that had once ruled the Mediterranean now begged for help to survive. And in Anatolia, Sultan Bayezid I assembled armies for conquest. Beyond the crumbling walls of Constantinople, a new power was rising with terrifying speed. In the hills of northwestern Anatolia, a Turkish chieftain named Osman commanded a small beylik or principality near the Byzantine frontier town of Bursa. Around 1299, Osman declared independence from the weakening Seljuk Sultanate, establishing what would become the Ottoman dynasty. His warriors, driven by religious fervor and promises of plunder, excelled at frontier warfare against Byzantine territories. The Ottomans differed fundamentally from other Turkish beyliks. Where rival chiefs squabbled over Anatolian pastures, Osman and his successors looked westward toward richer Byzantine lands. Their military combined traditional Turkish horse archers with innovative infantry tactics. More crucially, they welcomed everyone into their ranks. Christian converts, called devshirm, often rose to commanding positions. This openness created an expanding empire rather than a tribal federation. Osman's son Orhan captured Bursa in 1326, making it the first Ottoman capital. Nicaea, where church councils once debated theology, fell in 1331. Nicomedia surrendered in 1337. Every Byzantine city in Anatolia was now lost. But Orhan understood geography better than simple conquest. Constantinople sat on a peninsula, supplied by sea and separated from Ottoman territory by the narrow Bosporus Straits. The city could not starve while ships reached its harbors. The solution lay across the Dardanelles in Europe. In 1352, a devastating earthquake toppled walls along the Gallipoli Peninsula. Ottoman forces immediately occupied the ruins. From this foothold, they poured into Thrace and the Balkans. Adrianople, the second city of Byzantium, fell in 1369 and became the Ottoman capital of Edirne. Turkish armies pushed northward, crushing Serbian forces at Kosovo in 1389. Bulgarian kingdoms collapsed. Albanian resistance crumbled. Constantinople was now surrounded. Ottoman territory extended from central Anatolia through Thrace into modern Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece. The Byzantine capital had become an isolated Christian island in an Ottoman sea. Ships could still reach its ports, but every road led into enemy territory. The empire controlled nothing beyond the city's massive walls and a few coastal towns. In 1422, Sultan Murad II decided to test Constantinople's defenses. His army surrounded the land walls while ships blockaded the harbors. For weeks, Ottoman artillery bombarded the fortifications. The siege failed. Constantinople's triple walls, built by Theodosius II 1,000 years earlier, proved too formidable for existing siege technology. Byzantine defenders repaired breaches faster than cannons could create them. The Golden Horn remained closed by a massive chain stretched across its mouth. Ottoman ships could not break through. But Murad learned valuable lessons. Constantinople could not be starved into surrender while holding the seas. The city required simultaneous assault by land and water. The walls demanded more powerful artillery than currently existed. The defenders, though brave, numbered only a few thousand. With proper preparation and sufficient force, the city would fall. The Ottomans had time. Their empire controlled vast territories, generating enormous revenues. Their armies defeated every European coalition sent against them. Meanwhile, Constantinople's desperate embassies to Western courts produced only promises and small expeditions that changed nothing. The Senate and people of Rome once commanded legions across 3 continents. Now they watched Ottoman campfires burning in the hills beyond their walls, waiting for a sultan who possessed both the weapons and will to finish what Murad had begun. Young Mehmed sat on the Ottoman throne in February 1451, barely 19 years old. His father Murad had died unexpectedly, leaving the empire to a prince many dismissed as impetuous and unproven. Court observers whispered doubts. Foreign ambassadors predicted instability. European rulers hoped the boyish sultan might prove manageable. They all misread him catastrophically. Mehmed had studied the failed siege of 1422 obsessively. He knew every detail of where his father went wrong. While other princes hunted and caroused, Mehmed pored over maps and consulted with military engineers. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin fluently. He understood ballistics and metallurgy. Persian poets called him the scholar. His generals would learn to call him the conqueror. Within weeks of taking power, Mehmed revealed his true intentions. An Islamic prophecy, attributed to the Prophet Muhammad himself, promised that Constantinople would fall to a blessed army under a blessed commander. Mehmed believed destiny had chosen him. Every decision, every resource, every moment would serve a single purpose, fulfilling that prophecy. The Bosporus Strait was the key. Byzantine ships used this waterway to supply Constantinople from the Black Sea, carrying grain from Genoa's colonies in Crimea. Ottoman fortresses controlled the Asian shore, but ships still passed through the strait's narrowest point relatively unmolested. In spring 1452, Mehmed ordered construction of Rumeli Hisari, a massive fortress on the European shore directly across from the existing Asian fortification. Thousands of laborers worked through summer and autumn, building walls 60 feet high in just 4 months. Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI sent increasingly desperate protests. Mehmed ignored them. When Byzantine ambassadors arrived at his court demanding explanations, the Sultan ordered their execution. The message was unmistakable. Diplomacy had ended. Constantinople could no longer be supplied. Any ship attempting passage would face bombardment from both shores simultaneously. But Mehmed's masterstroke was taking shape in foundries across Edirne. He had recruited a Hungarian cannon founder named Urban, a master craftsman spurned by the Byzantines who could not afford his fees. Urban promised something unprecedented: artillery capable of smashing Constantinople's ancient walls. Mehmed gave him unlimited resources. Throughout winter 1452, Urban supervised the casting of dozens of massive bronze cannons. The largest, a monstrous gun nearly 27 feet long, could fire stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. Nothing like it had ever been built. The weapon required 60 oxen and 200 men to transport. Loading and firing took 3 hours. Engineers worried the tremendous recoil might shatter the barrel after a few shots. Mehmed ordered it cast anyway. He commissioned dozens more siege guns of varying sizes, along with hundreds of smaller artillery pieces. His arsenals produced massive stone balls by the thousands. Blacksmiths forged anchors, chains, and naval equipment. Shipwrights built vessels in Black Sea ports and along the Golden Horn approaches. By spring 1453, preparations reached completion. Mehmed had assembled an army estimated between 80,000 and 120,000 soldiers, though precise numbers remain debated. Irregular troops, elite Janissary infantry, cavalry units, engineers, artillerymen, and sappers gathered outside Edirne. A fleet of over 300 ships prepared to sail. In early April, the young sultan mounted his horse and rode westward toward Constantinople. Behind him stretched an army unprecedented in Ottoman history. Urban's enormous cannon slowly along reinforced roads, followed by supply trains carrying months of provisions. The largest military force assembled in a generation was moving toward walls that had withstood 17 sieges across 11 centuries. The prophecy would soon be tested. The Ottoman vanguard appeared before Constantinople's walls on April 5, 1453. By the following morning, Mehmed's entire army had deployed in a vast semicircle stretching from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. Janissary units established forward positions within bowshot of the Theodosian walls. Cavalry secured the hinterland. Engineers began assembling artillery batteries at carefully surveyed positions. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine could muster perhaps 7,000 defenders to man 14 miles of fortifications. Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani had arrived in January with 700 professional soldiers, the only significant foreign aid Constantinople would receive. European Christendom, divided by theological disputes and political rivalries, sent prayers but not armies. On April 12th, Urban's monster cannon fired its first shot. The massive stone ball struck the outer wall near the Romanus Gate with catastrophic force. Sections of ancient masonry, standing since the 5th century, crumbled into rubble. The sound reportedly carried across the Bosporus. Defenders watched in horror as subsequent shots systematically demolished sections that had turned back countless armies. But Byzantine engineers adapted quickly. Every night, work crews emerged to repair breaches using timber frames, packed earth, and salvaged stones. Women and children hauled materials through darkened streets. Monks abandoned monasteries to join repair gangs. The walls, though battered, held. Ottoman assault troops charging through bombardment gaps encountered hastily built inner barricades defended by desperate men who knew surrender meant slavery or death. The Golden Horn remained Constantinople's lifeline. A massive chain stretched across the harbor entrance between the city walls and Galata, preventing Ottoman vessels from entering. Byzantine and Genoese ships maintained control of these protected waters, ferrying supplies and enabling communication with the outside world. Mehmed's fleet prowled uselessly outside the chain, unable to attack the harbor walls. Then, in late April, Ottoman soldiers began constructing something inexplicable in the hills north of Galata. They built a wooden roadway greased with animal fat and soap, running from the Bosporus Valley over the ridge and down to the Golden Horn. On the night of April 22nd, they dragged 70 ships overland on wheeled cradles, a distance of nearly 1 mile, bypassing the chain entirely. Constantinople awoke to find enemy vessels in the supposedly secure Golden Horn. Mehmed had accomplished what seemed physically impossible. Now Byzantine defenders, already stretched desperately thin, had to man harbor walls they had considered safely protected. The noose tightened. Daily bombardments continued through May. Ottoman sappers tunneled beneath walls, packing mine shafts with explosives. Byzantine counterminers intercepted some tunnels and vicious underground combat fought with torches and daggers in suffocating darkness. Others reached their targets, collapsing sections of wall in tremendous explosions that showered defenders with debris. Justiniani commanded the defense at the Romanus Gate where Urban's cannon concentrated its fury. Day after day, assault waves crashed against makeshift barriers erected in bombardment breaches. Arrows darkened the sky. Greek fire, the Byzantine secret weapon, incinerated attackers. Bodies piled in the ditches. Yet Ottoman reserves seemed infinite while Byzantine numbers dwindled steadily. By late May, Constantine knew rescue would not come. Food stocks ran low. Ammunition dwindled. Every defender lost could not be replaced. In the Church of Holy Wisdom, citizens prayed before ancient icons, begging God for deliverance. Their ancestors had survived sieges through divine intervention. Surely heaven would not abandon the faithful now. Mehmed ordered one final, overwhelming assault for May 29th. His commanders promised victory or martyrdom. After 53 days, the prophecy approached its moment of truth. Dawn broke over Constantinople on Tuesday, May 29th, 1453. Mehmed had ordered the attack to begin before sunrise, when exhausted defenders would be least alert. At 1:30 in the morning, drums thundered across the Ottoman camp. Trumpets blared. The entire army surged forward in disciplined waves. First came the irregular troops, the Bashibazuks, expendable soldiers whose purpose was to exhaust Byzantine defenders and absorb their ammunition. They threw themselves at the walls with ladders and grappling hooks, screaming battle cries. Arrows and stones rained down upon them. Greek fire turned men into torches. The irregulars fell by hundreds, yet more kept coming, stepping over their own dead. After 2 hours, Mehmed withdrew the irregulars and sent in Anatolian regulars, better equipped and trained. They focused their assault on the battered sections near the Romanus Gate, where Urban's cannon had inflicted the most damage. Here Justinian commanded the defense from behind timber barriers erected in the gaps. For another 2 hours, the Anatolians pressed forward, gaining ground, losing it, dying in the rubble. Then, at first light, the Janissaries advanced. These elite warriors moved in perfect formation, their ranks unbroken despite the carnage before them. They wore tall white caps and carried scimitars that caught the rising sun. Military bands played behind them, an eerie accompaniment to slaughter. The Janissaries struck the Romanus Gate section with overwhelming force. Around this time, disaster struck the defense. A crossbow bolt wounded Justinian severely, piercing his breastplate. Blood spreading across his chest, the Geno's commander demanded to be taken from the walls. Constantine begged him to stay, knowing his retreat would devastate morale. But Justinian insisted. His men carried him toward the harbor, seeking a ship's surgeon. Soldiers witnessed their commander leaving. Panic rippled through the ranks. Simultaneously, Ottoman troops discovered something extraordinary. The Kirkoporta, a small postern gate near the northern end of the wall, stood unlocked. Some defender, in the chaos, had forgotten to secure it after a sortie. Dozens of Ottoman soldiers squeezed through this minor opening and emerged inside the outer fortification line. They raised their banners on the battlements. Defenders, seeing enemy flags atop the walls, believed the city had fallen. Some fled their positions. Others fought with redoubled desperation. In this confusion, the Janissaries finally broke through the main breaches at the Romanus Gate. Hundreds poured into the city. Emperor Constantine, seeing the collapse, cast aside his imperial regalia. Eyewitnesses reported his final words, "The city is fallen, and I am still alive," he drew his sword and plunged into the melee, fighting as an ordinary soldier. His body was never definitively identified among the thousands of dead. Ottoman troops swept through Constantinople's streets. Some civilians barricaded themselves in homes. Others fled toward the harbors, hoping for evacuation. Churches filled with refugees seeking sanctuary that would not come. Soldiers broke down doors, claiming the traditional 3 days of plunder Mehmed had promised. Women were seized. Treasuries looted. Ancient libraries burned. Blood ran in the gutters. By afternoon, Mehmed entered the city on horseback. He rode directly to the Hagia Sophia, the architectural wonder that had stood for 900 years as Christianity's greatest cathedral. Refugees packed inside prayed desperately, some believing the prophecies that angels would descend to save them at the final moment. No angels came. Mehmed dismounted at the cathedral entrance. Inside, he ordered the building's immediate conversion to a mosque. Workmen began whitewashing Christian mosaics. A mihrab indicating Mecca's direction was carved into the wall. By Friday prayers, just 3 days later, an imam's voice would echo where Byzantine emperors had once been crowned. The Roman Empire, which traced its history back 1,480 years to Augustus, had ended. Constantinople, the city Constantine the Great founded as the new Rome, would become Istanbul, jewel of the Ottoman realm. On that Tuesday in May, one world died and another was born. In the days following Conquest, Mehmed walked through streets still smelling of smoke and blood. He was 21 years old, conqueror of a city that had resisted invasion for a millennium. Where others might have seen ruins, he envisioned something magnificent. Constantinople would not merely survive as an Ottoman possession. It would become Istanbul, the greatest city in the Islamic world, surpassing even Cairo and Damascus in splendor. The young sultan faced an immediate problem. Constantinople's population had dwindled from perhaps 400,000 during Byzantine glory days to fewer than 50,000 at the siege's end. Thousands more had died in the assault or fled. Entire neighborhoods stood empty, their houses abandoned, their fountains dry. A world capital cannot function as a ghost town. Mehmed implemented a radical repopulation program. He issued orders throughout his empire requiring families from every major city to relocate to Istanbul. Turks came from Anatolia, Greeks from the Peloponnese, Armenians from eastern provinces, Jews from recently conquered territories. This was not gentle persuasion but imperial command, backed by the authority of a victorious conqueror. Yet he balanced compulsion with incentive. Settlers received abandoned houses, sometimes entire neighborhoods at no cost. Tax exemptions lasted for years. Merchants gained trading privileges. Artisans found ready employment in massive construction projects. What began as forced migration gradually attracted voluntary immigration as word spread of opportunities in the Sultan's new capital. Religious minorities discovered surprising tolerance. Mehmed established the Millet system, granting Greeks, Armenians, and Jews the right to govern their own communities under their own religious laws. The Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, abolished by the Byzantines after the union with Rome, was restored. Mehmed personally installed Gennadios Scholarios as patriarch, handing him a jeweled staff and guaranteeing Orthodox Christians freedom of worship. Armenians received similar autonomy under their own patriarch. Jews, expelled from Spain in 1492 and persecuted across Europe, found particular welcome. Sephardic refugees arrived in waves, bringing skills in medicine, finance, and commerce. They established synagogues in the Balat district. Ottoman officials valued their international trading connections. One contemporary observer noted that Istanbul's Jewish quarter contained more books than all of Christian Europe's libraries combined. On the city's highest point, overlooking the confluence of Bosphorus, Golden Horn, and Marmara Sea, Mehmed began construction of Topkapi Palace. The name meant Cannon Gate, commemorating the artillery that won the siege. Here was no single massive structure like European castles, but rather a sprawling complex of pavilions, courtyards, and gardens spreading across 170 acres. The palace embodied Ottoman imperial ideology. Visitors entered through the imperial gate into the first courtyard, open to all subjects seeking justice. The second courtyard, accessed through the Gate of Salutation, admitted only those conducting official business. Beyond lay the third courtyard, the Sultan's private domain, where few outsiders ever penetrated. At its heart stood the Privy Chamber, where Mehmed conducted state affairs surrounded by exquisite tilework and calligraphy. Byzantine craftsmen worked alongside Ottoman architects, their combined expertise producing something entirely new. Christian mosaicists who once decorated churches now created geometric Islamic patterns. Armenian jewelers fashioned ceremonial daggers. Greek sculptors carved marble fountains for harem courtyards. This fusion of traditions would define Ottoman art for centuries. Mehmed commissioned architects to transform the cityscape. Old churches became mosques, their crosses replaced with crescents. But new construction far exceeded conversion. The Fatih Mosque rose on the site of the old Church of the Holy Apostles, its dome challenging even Hagia Sophia in grandeur. Covered markets stretched for miles. Fountains flowed at street corners. Aqueducts repaired from Roman times brought fresh water from Belgrade Forest. By 1460, just 7 years after conquest, Istanbul's population had surpassed 100,000. Markets hummed with languages from 3 continents. Spice merchants from Persia negotiated with Venetian silk traders. Muslim scholars debated in madrasa, while Jewish rabbis taught in nearby synagogues. Christian church bells rang alongside the muezzin's call to prayer. Mehmet the Conqueror died in 1481, leaving an empire spanning 3 continents. But his grandson Suleiman, ascending the throne in 1520, would surpass even that legendary figure. Europeans called him Suleiman the Magnificent. His own people knew him as Kanuni, the lawgiver. Both titles captured different dimensions of a ruler who would define the Ottoman Empire's golden age. When Suleiman took power at 25, Istanbul had been the Ottoman capital for nearly 7 decades. Yet the city he inherited was still finding its architectural voice, still searching for forms that would express Ottoman grandeur in stone and tile. That search would end with the genius of a man named Sinan. Mimar Sinan began life as a Christian boy from Anatolia, conscripted into the Janissary Corps through the Devshirme system. He trained as a military engineer, building bridges for armies, fortifying castles, solving impossible logistical problems during campaigns from Vienna to Baghdad. He was 50 years old when Suleiman appointed him chief imperial architect in 1538. He would hold that position for half a century, transforming Istanbul's skyline with over 300 structures. Sinan's challenge was profound. Hagia Sophia still dominated the city, its massive dome visible from every quarter. Byzantine engineering remained unsurpassed. How could an Ottoman architect create something equally magnificent while expressing distinctly Islamic aesthetics? The church's interior, with its Christian mosaics and divided spaces, could never serve as a proper model for mosque design. Yet its structural achievement demanded response. The Shahzad Mosque, completed in 1548, was Sinan's first imperial commission. Built to honor Suleiman's deceased son, Prince Mehmed, it featured a central dome flanked by 4 half domes, creating a unified interior space flooded with light. Here Sinan began developing his signature style, balancing massive structural elements with delicate decorative details. The courtyard featured columns of porphyry and granite, their capitals carved with honeycomb patterns that seemed to dissolve solid stone into lace. But Shahzadeh was merely preparation. Between 1550 and 1557, Sinan designed and built the Süleymaniye Mosque complex, his masterpiece and Suleiman's crowning achievement. Positioned on Istanbul's third hill, overlooking the Golden Horn, it rose as a deliberate echo and answer to Hagia Sophia. The mosque's central dome spans 87 feet in diameter, slightly smaller than Hagia Sophia's but lifted 174 feet above the prayer hall. Sinan positioned it atop an octagonal base supported by 4 massive pillars, each reinforced with buttresses so cunningly integrated they seem decorative rather than structural. 2 half domes extend the space longitudinally. Natural light pours through 238 windows, creating an interior that seems to float weightlessly despite supporting thousands of tons of stone. The Süleymaniye was never merely a mosque. Sinan designed an entire complex spanning 60 acres. Courtyards led to 4 madrasa, a medical school, a hospital, a soup kitchen feeding the poor, a caravanserai for travelers, public baths, shops providing income for maintenance. At the complex's edge, identical mausoleums house Suleiman and his beloved wife Roxolana, their tombs facing Mecca beneath domes covered in exquisite tilework. The complex announced Istanbul's arrival as Islam's undisputed capital. Pilgrims traveling to Mecca stopped first in Istanbul. Scholars came from Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad to study in its libraries. The soup kitchen served 5,000 meals daily. In the hospital's wards, doctors trained in techniques combining Greek, Persian, and Arab medical knowledge treated patients regardless of religion. As Sinan's minarets pierced Istanbul's sky, they proclaimed a new era. The city was no longer merely occupying Byzantine space. It had created its own architectural language, one that would echo across the empire from Budapest to Baghdad. Under Suleiman's successors, Istanbul remained the heart of an empire stretching across 3 continents. The Ottoman court moved through gilded halls of Topkapi Palace, where sultans issued decrees affecting territories from Algeria to Yemen. Coffee houses multiplied along the waterfront. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and Amsterdam maintained permanent quarters. The city's population swelled past 500,000, making it among the world's largest metropolises. Yet beneath this cosmopolitan brilliance, the empire's military edge was dulling. The signs appeared gradually. Ottoman armies besieging Vienna in 1683 suffered catastrophic defeat. Treaties in 1699 ceded Hungarian territories. Russian expansion pressed southward toward the Black Sea. The question facing Ottoman reformers became urgent. How could an empire built on conquest adapt to defensive realities? Sultan Mahmud II answered by dissolving the Janissaries in 1826. These elite troops, once the empire's strength, had become a conservative force blocking modernization. When they revolted against reforms, Mahmud's loyal units bombarded their barracks. Thousands died. The Sultan then imposed European-style military training, established new administrative councils, and sent students to study in Paris and London. His successors accelerated these changes during the Tanzimat period, meaning reorganization. Between 1839 and 1876, reformers rewrote legal codes, established secular schools, built railways connecting Istanbul to European capitals. Ornate Victorian-style palaces rose along the Bosphorus. Gas lamps illuminated Paris boulevards where Ottoman gentlemen in frock coats strolled beside European diplomats. Telegraph wires transmitted orders across continents in minutes. Yet reform created dangerous tensions. Traditionalists resented Western influence. Subject peoples in the Balkans demanded independence. Intellectuals called for constitutional government. Sultan Abdulhamid II suspended parliament in 1878 and ruled as autocrat for 3 decades, expanding spy networks while promoting pan-Islamic unity. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908 forced restoration of constitutional rule. Hope surged through Istanbul's streets. But the empire was hemorrhaging territory. Italy seized Libya. Balkan Wars tore away European provinces. By 1914, Ottoman domains had shrunk to Anatolia, Syria, and Mesopotamia. World War I proved catastrophic. Siding with Germany, the Ottomans faced British, French, and Russian forces on multiple fronts. Gallipoli's defense in 1915 offered brief glory, but Arab revolt and Allied advances brought military collapse. Armistice came in October 1918. Allied warships anchored in the Golden Horn. British, French, Italian, and Greek troops occupied Istanbul, dividing the capital into zones. The 600-year-old Ottoman state lay shattered. From this ruin emerged Mustafa Kemal, a general who refused surrender. Sailing from occupied Istanbul in May 1919, he reached Anatolia and organized resistance. His nationalist movement established a provisional government in Ankara, that dusty Anatolian town. Greek forces pushing inland met fierce opposition. By 1922, Kemal's armies had driven out invaders. The Grand National Assembly in Ankara abolished the Sultanate in November 1922. Mehmed VI, last Ottoman Sultan, fled Istanbul aboard a British warship. The following year, Ankara became capital of the new Turkish Republic. Istanbul's reign as imperial capital had ended. The city that had commanded empires for 16 centuries faced the 20th century diminished. Ankara, not Istanbul, held political power. The population, which had peaked near 1 million in Ottoman times, shrank to roughly 650,000 by the 1920s. Mansions along the Bosphorus fell into disrepair. Grass sprouted between cobblestones in once grand squares. Yet Istanbul possessed something Ankara could never claim: layers of history running 16 centuries deep. Byzantine cisterns lay beneath Ottoman markets. Hagia Sophia's golden dome still dominated the skyline, now sharing it with hundreds of minarets. The city's geography remained unchanged, that extraordinary position straddling continents, connecting seas. The Turkish Republic grappled with this heritage. Initially, nationalist ideology viewed Ottoman symbols skeptically. Religious schools closed. The call to prayer was briefly translated into Turkish. But pragmatism prevailed. By the 1930s, restoration projects began preserving Byzantine monuments. Museums opened in imperial palaces. Scholars cataloged treasures that previous generations had ignored or misunderstood. The city's growth resumed after World War II, then exploded. Rural Anatolians seeking opportunity flooded Istanbul. Squatter settlements mushroomed on hillsides. By 1970, the population exceeded 2 million. By 2000, it approached 10 million. Today, over 15 million people call Istanbul home, making it among Europe's most populous metropolitan areas despite sitting partly in Asia. Modern highways now span the Bosphorus where Byzantine and Ottoman ferries once crossed. A tunnel runs beneath the strait, carrying commuters between continents in minutes. Glass towers rise in business districts. Yet the historic peninsula endures, its silhouette remarkably unchanged. Topkapi Palace remains. The Hippodrome still bears ancient columns. City walls, though crumbling in places, trace their original Byzantine course. Hagia Sophia's journey encapsulates these tensions between past and present. Mustafa Kemal converted it to a museum in 1935, symbolizing secular modernity. For 85 years, tourists and scholars wandered its vast interior, admiring both Christian mosaics and Islamic calligraphy. Then in 2020, Turkish authorities reconverted it to a mosque. Carpets covered marble floors. Prayer times resumed beneath the dome where Byzantine emperors once stood. The decision sparked international debate, but Istanbul absorbed this change as it has absorbed so many others. The city contains over 3,000 mosques. It shelters dozens of active churches. Synagogues serve Jewish communities whose ancestors fled Spanish persecution 5 centuries ago. Orthodox patriarchs still maintain headquarters where they have resided since the 4th century. This remains Istanbul's genius, the capacity to hold contradictions. Ancient and modern. European and Asian. Sacred and secular. The fishermen who cast lines from Galata bridge work beneath medieval towers and contemporary hotels. The Grand Bazaar, trading goods for over 500 years, now accepts credit cards. No longer the capital. No longer Constantinople. Yet still the city where continents meet, where empires rose and fell, where Byzantium's walls still echo with centuries of human ambition, faith, and endurance. From Roman dream to Byzantine glory to Ottoman majesty, this city has survived every transformation history could deliver. Subscribe to explore more stories of places that shaped our world.